Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to the Cryptodamus Astrology channel, where we talk about financial astrology and general mundane astrology. I'm here to talk about this upcoming lunar eclipse on USA Election Day, November 8th. Guys, this is one of the most interesting, unique, and unusual and complex pieces of astrology I have seen in a long time, maybe ever. It's very, very interesting, very interesting astrology. Not easy astrology. This is going to be very intense situation. And I'm just going to kind of go through it and break it down for you a little bit, so we can all know what to expect. Eclipses are interesting. You know, we've already been feeling the effect of the eclipse, possibly even for several weeks. They're not just limited to the day that they happen. The effect of eclipses can come in for weeks before and can last for weeks after. And it's usually, a big energy shift. It's also usually, eclipses are kind of edgy and rough experiences. They're not always bad. They can bring breakthroughs. They can bring breakdowns. This one might bring a nervous breakdown for the USA on election day. I think it's going to be, high drama and high stress. But it can also bring, a lot of personal turmoil, eclipses, and this one especially. I'm going to go to my astrology software here, which is Luna. Hang on a second. I got to hook that up. And we're going to look at this alignment. I've been putting out this information, for my Patreon subscribers and also a little bit on Twitter. So definitely would love it if you checked out my Patreon, and you can find that on my website, which is astrocryptoreport.com. There's a link to my Patreon group, and they've been getting a lot of information about this eclipse for 4 weeks, really. So the eclipse is on November 8th. It's exact at 3:01 a.m. in the morning on the US West Coast, which is Pacific time. So of course that may be a different time or even a different day, depending on where you are personally located, whether it's in Asia, Australia, Europe, South America. So this eclipse is at 16 degrees Taurus. The eclipse full moon axis is between Taurus and Scorpio. The themes of Taurus and Scorpio. Taurus is, about stability and the status quo. It's a positive sign, Taurus, of peace and prosperity. It's a wealth sign. However, it's change resistant, and the sign of Scorpio is more about embracing change. So, we can really say there's the kind of resistance to change versus embracing change is one of the themes. Now, the other thing that it's just kind of interesting to really understand is that for the last 3 or 4 years, we've had Uranus in Taurus really disrupting the stability. We've had so much tumultuous change over the past 3 or 4 years. And a lot of that is due astrologically or correlates with Uranus transiting through the sign of Taurus, because Taurus is all about stability and Uranus is all about disruption of the status quo. And we've certainly seen that in politics and with the pandemic and many other ways, right? We've seen a lot of massive disruptions to the status quo of how we were used to living on planet Earth. Well, guys, this lunar eclipse is at 16 Taurus in the same degree conjunct Uranus. Okay. Again, Uranus represents disruption. It's unpredictable and chaotic. It brings surprise events. It brings the unexpected. It is the unpredictable itself. Okay. So I think this is going to bring a lot of surprises on USA Election Day for both parties. Now, that being said, Uranus often represents the left and progressive causes, whereas Saturn often represents the right and conservative causes. Now, Uranus here is eclipsed. So I think that's bad for Democrats, number one, I'll say. I also think that Uranus can indicate, it's a disruption of the status quo. So it tends to favor the party that's out of power, and that right now is the Republicans. And so I think that this eclipse favors the Republicans, taking back, especially the House of Representatives and maybe even the US Senate. So Now, there's some other really interesting features in this eclipse. This eclipse actually has a couple of favorable positive features. And that is number one, that at least the moon in Taurus, that is the sign of the moon's exaltation. So the moon is exalted in Taurus. It has dignity. That's something positive. It's something favorable. Whether it will mitigate the negativity of the eclipse or not is hard to say. It's conjunct the North Node. The North Node tends to be a little bit more favorable for gains and worldly success. So those are somewhat favorable. Having the moon conjunct Uranus, though, I will say, is a collective nervous system stress out. It could be a collective nervous breakdown. We know that the election is going to be high drama and extremely emotional, with a lot of chaotic and unpredictable effects over the next week. So that much we can say. And yeah, the moon exactly conjunct Uranus in this eclipse configuration could be shocking. It could be shocking. And also just personally, we may have shocking, or we may have been already feeling shocking events in our personal lives that have been really difficult and undermine stability and the status quo. Now, Uranus usually comes to play when things have gotten stuck in a routine, stuck in a rut, and the routine has gotten stale. Uranus's job is to shake things up. And sometimes it does that in a shocking, unexpected manner. So we've got to keep those themes in mind for this eclipse. The other interesting and positive, I'll say favorable element of this eclipse is that Mercury is almost exact cazimi to the sun, and that's typically considered to be favorable. Cazimi means in the heart of the sun, and that's associated with a kind of dignity, a kind of superpower. For the power of that planet becomes much stronger in a favorable way. So Mercury is exalted. That's favorable for like the election logistics, the actual vote counting. I think that could help. So hopefully we won't see contested elections. So those are some. Communication is favorable. Logistics are favored. Tech, travel, communication, and logistics are all favored with a Mercury cazimi. So that's favorable. Now let's look at what's unfavorable. As I've said, the moon conjunct Uranus has a certain shocking, unexpected surprise, chaotic, unexpected surprise element to it. And that can be very difficult to deal with. It's associated with lightning strikes and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and stuff like that. So climactically also freak storms and hurricanes and tornadoes. Now we could see a political, tornado sweeping through the country here. The other, there's two other problems, which is this actually forms a T-square with Saturn as the apex, and Saturn's up here at 18 degrees Aquarius. So you've got the Mercury, the Sun, in Scorpio, and to some degree Venus, and the Moon and Uranus are all in a square to Saturn. And squares to Saturn are very uncomfortable. They're very tense. They feel very heavy and serious, and they bring serious challenges, struggles, difficulties, and limitations, particularly for markets. I think that this is a very limiting factor that will limit any upward moves. We could see some rallies. I mean, it's so unpredictable and hard to predict what this eclipse will do because Uranus, the unpredictable itself, is so featured here. However, the squares from Saturn, what's going to happen over the course of next week and already starting this weekend is Venus will square Saturn. Venus will oppose Uranus on Saturday and square Saturn on Sunday. Today is Friday. Today is Friday, November 4th, as I'm recording this. Then next week, Mercury and the Sun are going to oppose Uranus and then square Saturn a few days later as well. So, we have a series of squares here. And of course, the eclipsed moon is squaring Saturn as well. And Uranus is also still in that square to Saturn, although it's separating now. So a lot of squares to Saturn brings challenges, difficulties, a heavy, serious feeling, okay? And Uranus can, this Uranus-Saturn aspects, like hard aspects, can bring a lot of anxiety and fear, a heavy, serious feeling, a feeling of discouragement, having to up against, very hard limitations of what we can do, what's really possible. So all of these squares to Saturn, I think, make this eclipse especially difficult. And I think they really place a very strong limit, on any type of market rebound. I think the best case scenario for the financial markets, including crypto and stocks, is that we're going to see continued sideways movement at these lower support levels. But I don't, now another way of looking at this eclipse, I don't see any major rally for the markets. Another way of looking at this eclipse is that this eclipse is activating the Uranus-Saturn square. And it's kind of the final hurrah of the Uranus-Saturn square, which has been in effect since February of 2021. Okay. And that's brought a lot of ups and downs and twists and turns over the last 18 months or so. It's activating that Uranus-Saturn square, and that is a high stress aspect. That is a crisis aspect. So in that regard, we can't rule out a major crisis, but we also can't say exactly how it will manifest. Will it be a political crisis brought about by a contested election results? Will it be a financial crisis in the markets? Will there be that capitulation or next leg down that a lot of people are expecting? Or will it come from some international events? Maybe something having to do with the war in Ukraine or somewhere else. Certainly we have the energy crisis in Europe right now, and there's other places. There's certainly other places where we could see crises develop, right? The Middle East or other places. So now I just want to actually go and look at what a lunar eclipse actually is, right? A lunar eclipse is when the Earth, it's a full moon, and the Earth exactly lines up between the light rays from the sun and blocks them from hitting the moon. So in other words, it casts a shadow on the moon. Okay. So one of the things that I always tell people about lunar eclipses or eclipses in general is that they have to do with the shadow, what the famous psychoanalyst Carl Jung called the shadow, which is like the shadow aspects of the human consciousness. And those are the darker elements of the human consciousness, and that has to do with fear, fear and anger and hatred, and hate groups and prejudice, violence and war, and any kind of dark unconscious elements of ourselves or others can be, we can be expected to confront these shadow elements of ourselves and others over the period of the eclipse, including the weeks before and several weeks after. And so, it's really important to just realize that people may be struggling, people may be dealing with things that you're not aware of. And so we have to be extra kind and extra compassionate and extra patient with ourselves and others during these periods of eclipses. And it really helps if we can do meditation and prayer, make offerings to charity, all of these things, ceremonies, rituals, meditation, prayer, practicing offerings and generosity. All of these things can soften the edges of the eclipse a little bit for ourselves, and help us to get through any kind of difficult, challenging times. So like I said, this is very complex. What makes it so complex? The partile conjunction to Uranus, the unpredictable, exciting. It could be very exciting. I think election day is going to be an exciting day, maybe too exciting for some people. We have to breathe and remember to calm down. You may feel like you want to pop a Xanax on election day, and that's completely normal, I think, given what we're seeing in this astrology. The other thing that's really unusual and rare is Mercury almost exactly cazimi the sun on the eclipse. Very rare. It's possibly something that's kind of favorable, but all these squares to Saturn make it very difficult, stressful, and challenging. And we may feel really discouraged, by circumstances and events. We may feel that we're up against some personal limitation, that we can't solve. It's a problem that we can't solve right now. And so we have to just have patience, that, things will shift in time and a solution will arise when the time is right. We don't always understand why we may have certain problems or limitations, but sometimes they're a blessing in disguise. So the other unfavorable in this eclipse that I want to also just point out is that Venus is in a pretty bad place for this eclipse because it's debilitated in the sign of Scorpio, its sign of detriment, and it is in combustion to the sun. Now, the eclipse is in Taurus, so Venus is actually the eclipse ruler, and she is she's in double jeopardy here, maybe even triple jeopardy, debilitated by sign, one of the most suboptimal sign placements, combusts the sun, meaning invisible in the sky, her power is weakened, and also in a wide conjunction to that south node, which has to do with the past and possibly karmic debts that have to be paid from the past. So Venus, the eclipse ruler, is in a quite of a difficult position. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out. I'm not really, aside from what I've said, we could see some freak weather events across the globe, including earthquakes, volcano eruptions, and freak storms. God forbid. I hope that we don't see any major catastrophe or disaster. Of course not. We could see, I think we're going to see a lot of shocking surprises in the days leading up to the eclipse and certainly in the days after. My prediction is that I think that the Republicans will take control of both houses of Congress. And also they will, the kind of pro-life. Unfortunately, I'm a pro-choice person, so I would, I don't want to see this happen, but I do think because Venus is so badly debilitated that this is bad for women's rights. And I think that we're going to see really strong anti-abortion measures get passed in the United States in the wake of this eclipse. I think that it is going to be favorable for the pro-life Republicans. Okay. Unfortunately, I hate to say that. But that's what I think this eclipse is pointing to. Also in places like Iran and Afghanistan, we could see harsh measures against women's equality. So those are some other kind of, some other kind of issues that might arise during this eclipse. So, like I said, talking about the shadow elements, this is more having to do with, depending on where the eclipses fall in our charts is how we will personally be affected by this, and, where our shadow may arise or where we may have to deal with the shadow arising in friends or family or lovers or partners or husbands or wives or children. We can certainly encounter some difficult personal events around this. In general, I kind of just recommend people take it really mellow on eclipse days, especially like this one. I personally like to focus on prayer and meditation and trying to have relaxation, because the nervous system can get really bent out of whack on these kind of eclipse days. So prayer, meditation, maybe, going to the spa, saunas, steam rooms, taking a long hot bath, walking in nature. These are all things. Do whatever you have to do to take care of yourself, okay, to stay sane, because this is a nervous system stress. It's a collective nervous system stress. And even though you may personally not have a lot of stress or anxiety in your life, you may get caught up in the wave of anxiety may be so strong that you may get caught up in it collectively. So it's really important to try to stay relaxed and stay sane during this period over the next 7 to 10 days, but especially on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, that 72-hour period that's right around the eclipse. So those are all the really key features of the eclipse. I hope that you found that interesting. If you do like this kind of information, check out my website, guys, astrocryptoreport.com, and it's got a lot of information on my Patreon group, subscriptions I have on Substack, and I have educational materials for astrology and financial astrology, and I'm also always available for consultations and private astrology tutorials. My general natal chart consultation is $250 for a 1.5-hour reading. So if you want to see how the eclipses are going to fall in your chart, or things like Mars retrograde or Jupiter in Pisces, some of these shifts we've been seeing, contact me, go to my website and book a consultation. The other thing that I do want to mention, the last thing I do want to mention is actually that Mars, has just turned retrograde about a week ago. And so that's another feature of the eclipse chart, is that Mars is in its once every 2-year retrograde position. And that also adds a kind of another layer of complexity and challenges to this chart. It's not really interacting with the eclipse energy too much. However, it's, Mars retrograde periods, generally speaking, I think are seen by most astrologers being a little bit extra difficult and stressful. So that's just another layer there. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to be continuing to have some prominent astrologers on the channel as my guests. And that will be upcoming in the next couple weeks. So I'll be posting this stuff on Twitter. And I really just wish everybody, I wish everybody happiness and peace, and that any chaotic changes, that are brought about by this eclipse, I hope that they are in the long term favorable and bring, peace and prosperity, good health and wellness, wealth, and a higher spiritual consciousness. Eclipses, if we're able to confront eclipses in a healthy, skillful way and meet the shadow with compassion and patience, then eclipses can actually be an opportunity for evolutionary growth and higher spiritual consciousness. Eclipses can actually they can shake up, stir the pot in a way that may feel uncomfortable, but may ultimately bring about positive changes. So try to keep that in mind. And I wish everybody the best. And I hope everybody's okay, and stay safe and stay sane and take care of yourself over the next week. And we'll check in again soon. Thanks again for subscribing to my channel and for liking my posts. And I appreciate all your support on my YouTube channel. And everybody have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you soon.